Over the last few days, we spent some time talking about Taylor Jenkins' job security, how big next season could be for him. But what about Zach Kleiman? What about the Memphis Grizzlies GM? Is this a pivotal season for him as well? Is this a year he needs to produce an upgrade in results to increase his job security? Let's talk about it here next on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with me on today, and thank you for tuning in each and every day to Locked On Grizzlies as well. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Speaking of terms and conditions, we've talked about, kind of the terms and conditions that Taylor Jenkins has been laid out, for the upcoming season in the past and whatnot. And we've, I remember last summer we talked about Zach Kleiman, how, it was a big summer for him as the Grizzlies GM and whatnot. But we're about to dive a little bit deeper into, this situation in terms of the case for Zach Kleiman and kind of where he stands right now in terms of his status going forward with the Grizzlies. But that's just, a piece of today's show. In our second segment, we're going to talk about, Dalton Knecht a little bit. There is a mock draft at ESPN that has Dalton Knecht now as the Grizzlies pick at number 9. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the second segment. And then that's going to kind of take us into our third segment, our last point. Something that if you're an everyday listener or a longtime listener of Locked On Grizzlies, it's something you've heard me harp on a little bit, but there's a major need that the Grizzlies have that just hasn't been spoken on a lot. We talk about this center need, and I can make the argument that this need is just as important or potentially even more important than the need at center. But we'll say that for the third segment. But right now, let's talk about Zach Kleiman. For you who's unfamiliar with Zach Kleiman, he's been in the Grizzlies organization for a while. I believe the exact year is 2015, something like that. But he's been in the Grizzlies organization for a while, was promoted to general manager, president of basketball operations, 2019. If you remember 2019, that's the year Ja Morant got drafted. That's the year Taylor Jenkins became the head coach. So it's kind of like this three-headed alliance in a way. Ja's rookie year was Taylor Jenkins' first year as head coach. It was also Zach Kleiman's first year, as general manager. And things hit the ground running, right? Your first draft, you get, you get a guy like Ja Morant, at number 2, which, was going to happen. But Brandon Clark was kind of your late first round pick. And, it worked out. He got a second contract. So Brandon Clark and Ja in your first draft. And then in the second draft, you get Desmond Bane on the back at the very back of the first round, last pick of the first round. And so the way things started, things are going really good for Kleiman, right? Like it is, people call him King Kleiman. Things can go no wrong or whatever. And then the next year, you end up, with a trade, because of a trade with the Pelicans. The Pelicans drafted Zaire Williams at number 10, and his rights were acquired by the Memphis Grizzlies. So, that's NBA language. But in my mind, the Grizzlies drafted Zaire Williams. And that's pretty much what it was. And that hasn't worked out as well. And that was a lottery pick. And it seems like since then, things haven't been as smoothly with the first round picks. The next year, you draft David Roddy and Jake LaRavia. David Roddy isn't on the team anymore. He was traded after just a year and a half here. And Jake LaRavia is here. He's still kind of making his way. I think this year, if you look at the last couple months of the season, that was the most we've seen of Jake LaRavia since he's been in Memphis. When he first arrived his rookie year, first 5-6 games, started off really strong, one of the top rookie three-point shooters, and then got sick. Things went down from there, injuries and everything else. But basically the point is you haven't seen enough from Jake LaRavia at this point to say, oh, yeah, that's the guy. And Trading David Roddy a year and a half into his tenure, his career was almost in the middens of we got that pick wrong. The next year you don't draft for player in the first round because of the trade where you land Marcus Smart and whatnot. But let's get into more than just the draft stuff. And I want to make my case as well as to where I stand on this topic. I think Zach Kleiman is pretty safe right now. I think Zach Kleiman's job security is just fine. I don't think Zach Kleiman is going anywhere. He's done a terrific job to me. I think there are certain areas where he can improve. I think there are certain areas where Taylor Jenkins can improve. And, the cohesiveness between those two will determine the trajectory of this team going forward. But if you get into all the, the breakdowns of his job, cap management and things like that, I think the Grizzlies have been just fine. They're about to go into luxury tax this year, and this is going to be the first time they enter that situation. So I think he's been fine in that area. We talk about the drafting, right? Here's my thing, with the Grizzlies and as it pertains to the draft. Yes, you can say, oh, David Roddy and hasn't worked out. Zaire Williams hasn't worked out. Jake LaRavia, we haven't seen enough to say, one way or another, but probably hasn't worked out so far. With all that being said, the thing is, guess what? He drafted G.G. Jackson at 45. There were 10 players on the all-rookie teams a couple days ago. 10 players. Only 1 second-round pick. 45th pick in the draft. Youngest player in the entire draft. The Grizzlies drafted that guy. Yes, David Roddy didn't work out. But you know who has? The second-round pick from that draft. Vince Williams. He's a potential NBA starter. Now you got him on a second contract, 4-year deal. The point that I'm making here is I think that those draft steals, second round getting Vince Williams, second round getting G.G. Jackson, those things make up for some of the first round misses. Yeah, you missed on Zaire Williams, so to speak, but Vince Williams is better right now. So that kind of covers up that mistake, in my opinion. Now, when you get to the other things, so when it comes to drafting, I think Zach Kleiman is just fine. I think he's done a terrific job. He located Ja Morant. Well, I'm not going to say he located Ja Morant. Anybody with two eyes and a clear mind probably would have drafted Ja Morant in that situation. But the point is, Brandon Clark, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Santi Aldama, all were first-round picks on this watch. Second-round picks include guys like Vince Williams and G.G. Jackson. All those players that I just mentioned have been rotation players for the Memphis Grizzlies and have made considerable impacts for the Memphis Grizzlies. Drafting has been fine. That's not the problem. The problem that I have is there are some roster management, team building things. For example, how did you acquire David Roddy? Well, you traded away Anthony Melton. That's not one that I really saw at the time as making sense. And looking back on it, David Roddy got traded. Anthony Melton, had a pretty good season before his back was bothering him with the Sixers. So that trade did not work out. Going even a step further, you can debate the Santi Aldama, Kyle Anderson one. I understand why the Grizzlies did what they did. They weren't saying that Santi Aldama is a better player. They were just saying he's a better fit. They need more shooting, which some we may or may not talk about a little bit later. But and that's been a problem for this team as well. So certain weaknesses have not been capitalized on, and we talk about it from the coaching perspective all the time, right? Like with Taylor Jenkins. Yes, the Grizzlies are one of the top paint scoring teams in the NBA. They get out of transition, but they struggle shooting. They struggle in the half court. How much of that is just Taylor Jenkins? Is he not being put in position to is he not being given, the players to maximize, what he wants to maximize? You can make an argument for that. And if you're making that argument, that falls more on Zach Kleiman than it does Taylor Jenkins. So that's my only, I guess you would say, heart under the Kleiman era so far. There are certain weaknesses that have not been magnified, that have not been improved on. And this year, it'll be good to see those things happen. I'm sure at this point, you talk about the drafting, you talk about, the way they've handled, the salary cap and things like that. Fine job. I only have any harp just about, certain personnel decisions. Trading Anthony Melton. Trading Steven Adams. I mean, that's one most people know, if you tuned in for the show for a while now, was not a fan of that. Still not a fan of it. There's a reason we keep talking about the Grizzlies drafting a big almost every day on the show, and it's because they traded away their starting big man, who, by the way, seems to be progressing really well from his surgery over there in Houston. So if you're going to hit me with, oh, well, we didn't know if he was going to come back well and all that, Houston seems to be thinking he'll be just fine. So there's that as well. But all in all, I think the Zach Kleiman tenure has worked out for the Grizzlies. It's been good, and at any sense, I don't get I just don't get the conversations, about his job security at all. I think Zach Kleiman is pretty safe. I think Taylor Jenkins, as my coach Joe Munex recently talked about, that's more of where the conversation belongs right now. That's the head coach, and usually general managers outlast head coaches, because as a general manager, you get a chance to make a coaching change potentially if something isn't working out. Now, if you make multiple coaching hires and they're failing, that's when the GM or the president of basketball operations or the leader in the front office really starts to become under fire. And I don't think Zach Kleiman has reached that point yet. Overall, he's done a solid job. The Grizzlies are a solid organization, and a lot of that starts with Zach Kleiman. Coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies, I mentioned a little bit in this segment, but we had to talk about Dalton Knecht. He was in a recent mock draft that I saw. So let's talk about the idea of potentially adding him to the Memphis Grizzlies. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs. Listen, LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easily intuitive for you. So make sure when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the job. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the place to go. And remember this, LinkedIn Jobs knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, and you might not have the time or the resources to hire. Guess what? 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring, because LinkedIn is the place to go. So post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk about Dalton Knecht. Could he be a fit with the Memphis Grizzlies? Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. In our first segment, we talked about Zach Kleiman, Grizzlies president, basketball operations, general manager, the case for him. And, my verdict is Zach Kleiman is safe. He's done a terrific job in at least 2 of the 3 main areas that I consider, primary jobs for the general manager. And, the one area that he hasn't done great at kind of boils over into why we're talking about Dalton Knecht right now. The Grizzlies haven't been a great shooting team, and it ain't stretching imagination. And ESPN recently posted a mock draft. If you haven't been following along, I think ESPN's first mock draft had a Stephon Castle at UConn being the pick. This one, there's a little pivot, and it's Dalton Knecht. Now, a little more familiarity on Dalton Knecht here. If you watched him at the combine, really impressive athletically. I think he had a nice vertical. I think it was like 37 or something, but really impressive. Of course, he shot the basketball well. He's 6'7" guy, very, very good shooter, very strong offensive. And quite frankly, you can make an argument that Dalton Knecht is the best shooter in the draft. You can make that argument without a doubt. I've followed this guy for a while. Obviously, longtime followers of the show do know I graduated from the University of Tennessee. Rick Barnes was the head coach while I was there, and he's someone that I've, been in the practices. I know how Rick Barnes coaches players, and I want to share this, takeaway that I saw someone post from a Rick Barnes practice. If you've heard anything about Rick Barnes practices, newsflash, they ain't fun. They're not fun. They're tough, and there's some tough love at those practices. You got to have some thick skin to get through a Rick Barnes practice. But with all that being said, so I believe her name is Mika Mashak. This is who I saw make this post. She's a life coach for athletes, and Rick Barnes, basically, an agent as well. But Rick Barnes will allow agents and parents or whatever to come to certain practices and whatnot. So here's a story that she shared on social media that I'm going to share on Locked On Grizzlies. She said that it was early in the season, right? This was early in the season. And she said before games, Coach Barnes, as I was just saying, would let parents and agents sit in on practices or whatever. And he would go in, as she said, he would go in on your kid, whether you were there or not. And she said the players always have each other backs, but they were going at it. Although I'm a tough mom, my nurturing side was kicking in. I had to go sit in the car to not watch. And she said she had to go sit in the car to not watch Rick Barnes go in on these guys. But okay, let's get. So she said it was still heated when I returned. It was beyond tough for Dalton Knecht. But here's the thing. After that practice, Dalton Knecht didn't even leave. He grabbed the coach and was studying the film right after. He didn't sulk or complain, just went straight to how I can get better. He wanted to be coached. He was already good, but he wanted to be better defensively, not just for him, for the team. He knew the SEC was a different level, and he respected it. He wanted to be ready. I think that's the story that pretty much describes Dalton Knecht. I've listened because, from going to the school, I still have a lot of connections out there, and everyone says something similar. Like, that's why I decided to share this story, because I know that that's a very believable story, because I've heard similar stories just about, after games. Dalton Knecht still getting up shots. There's times, they're trying to do media availability. He's still getting up shots right now after the game. There was a game where he missed a couple free throws. Very good free throw shooter, by the way. Still getting up free throws after the game. All of this is to say that I think he could fit in Memphis. Now, I know, my coach Joe Monex has done does this help the Grizzlies win a championship next season? I think there's an avenue for that. I really do. Dalton Knecht is a plus 3-point shooter. The Grizzlies need those. Dalton Knecht is a 6'7" wing who can take advantage of mismatches. The Grizzlies need those. He's a competitor. He's a guy who doesn't need the ball to be very effective. The Grizzlies need those type of guys, because you got Gigi Jackson, you got Ja Morant, you got Desmond Bane, you got Jaren Jackson Jr. All those guys are going to want the ball when they're on the floor. You need guys who can play off of those players very well. Getting into his game a little bit, we talked about the strengths. We got to talk about the weaknesses a little bit as well. Dalton Knecht, over his last 2 years in college basketball, before he came to Tennessee and when he came to Tennessee, in both seasons, averaged over 20 points per game. What he didn't do was average more than 1.8 assists. So despite averaging over 20 points per game twice, hasn't even averaged 2 assists per game. Playmaking is a concern. And I've seen, him play out of pick and rolls. If you go watch that game against Purdue, very good example against Zach Kleiman. Dalton Knecht, putting him in pick and rolls and playing really well. Actually was, I think, doing some decent decision making in that game. But if you look at the bigger sample size, it just isn't there. So you're going to need more of that. If you know anything about the Grizzlies, positions pretty much 1 through 4 are virtually interchangeable. If you play the 2, play the 3, you're probably going to do some ball handling in this offense. You name a player on the Grizzlies roster that plays one of those positions, I'll name a player that has been a primary ball handler for possessions at a time before, whether it's guys that you least expected from. I've seen Vince Williams, Luke Kennard, John Conchar, Zaire Williams, all have been put in primary ball handling roles for the Memphis Grizzlies. And that's a Taylor Jenkins staple. They want the offense to be versatile. They want everyone to be able to play out of pick and rolls and make decisions. So if Dalton Knecht comes here, that's going to be something that has to improve for him. Memphis is not the place you come to just sit in the corner and shoot 3-pointers. Memphis is not the place to come for that. You need to be a versatile offensive weapon. And I think he has all of the tools to be that type of player. I'm on board with it. I know some people are going to think, oh, well, that's your UT bias and all that. No, it's not. This is just basketball analysis. I think that Dalton Knecht's shooting profile is exactly what the Grizzlies need. Speaking of the Grizzlies shooting profile, and Dalton Knecht's shooting profile. Let's get into that a little bit. The Grizzlies have a big, major unspoken need. We've had all this talk about the center spot. I'm going to get to that in a second here on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to that, this episode is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time. Or you can just get your money back. It's that simple, because with eBay Motors, you're buying rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk about a major unspoken need. This is my major. I guess you can call it Damichael's hot take on the Memphis Grizzlies. So stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole. And today's show, we talked about Zach Kleiman in the first segment. Talked about Dalton Knecht. I think he is a guy who fits, the profile of what the Grizzlies need. And the third segment is a big reason why I feel that Dalton Knecht fits. Because if you're not convinced yet, if you're saying, Dalton Knecht, 23-year-old prospect, he's older, limited upside. Damichael, I don't know. I'm not ready to risk a top 10 pick on a guy who's going to be a role player, more than likely. Well, guess what? That's fine, because I'm about to convince you in this third segment. I'm definitely about to convince you. The Grizzlies have a need that, in my opinion, is just as big as the need for a center. It's just as big. It's just as important. And quite frankly, I can make the argument that it's even more important than the need for center. You look at the roster and you see a need for a big man. I look at the roster and I say this is 2024 NBA basketball. The Boston Celtics are shooting over 40 three-point attempts per game. The Grizzlies were top 5 in the NBA in three-point attempts per game this season. But none of you, can anyone name me? Think real hard, because I'm going to pause for a second after say this. Can you tell me the last time the Grizzlies ranked in the top 10 in three-point shooting percentage in the NBA? Think about it. Think about all those Grizzlies teams, you watch. Shout out to the OG Grizzlies fans out there. Think the grit and grind days, Think, Jason Williams, Mike Miller, James Posey, Think about all those guys. Pau Gasol days, then Marc Gasol, Zebo. We talked about, Rudy Gay, OJ Mayo. Think about all those guys. Yeah, I know. It's been a while. 2006, 2007. That is the last time the Grizzlies had a top 10. If you want to extend it to top 15, the last time they finished in the top half of the NBA in three-point shooting, 2016, 2017. They were 15th that year. The reason we do all this talking about grit and grind, right? Whether it was during the grit and grind days, whether it's now when people say, oh, this team, has some similarities to the grit and grind teams. You talk about all the good with that. Yeah. The good is they're gritty. But no one talks about the fact that these teams have to be gritty because they don't shoot well. It's just me being honest. And the stats are proving it. We've talked about this for a long time, every single year. And this is a major unspoken need to me because you got Desmond Bane, you got Luke Kennard. I always say, I've said it before on the show, when you get past Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard, how many guys do you trust? Wide open three-pointer game on the line. Oh, yeah, you're comfortable with that guy shooting the basketball. If the ball's passed to Luke Kennard, 3 seconds left in the game, Grizzlies down 2, and he's wide open in three-point line, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a bucket. Desmond Bane, same thing. Oh, yeah, defense, you just lost the game. How many more guys is that the case for you? Here's my argument. I think Vince Williams, you can make that case. I can. Solid 3-point shooter, over 1.5 3-point made field goals last season per game, and shot it at a respectable 37%. But here's the thing. The NBA's average, the NBA 3-point average is 36.6% last season. You know what the Grizzlies shot from 3-point range this year? They finished 29th in the NBA, 34.6%. Okay, I get it. You're saying, yeah, well, Damichael, a lot of those guys aren't on the roster anymore. That's very true. So we can go back to last season where the Grizzlies shot 34.8%, good for 23rd in the NBA. They need more shooters. Teams respect Desmond Bane. Teams respect Luke Kennard. But how many guys other than that do teams respect? When you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, because let's get into some of these other teams real quick that are still playing. Because we talked about the big man need, but here's for the shooter thing. When you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, teams know they can't help off of Mike Conley. And sometimes they still do. And the result was a 40% 3-point shooting season this year. Anthony Edwards, enough said. I mean, what's understood doesn't need to be explained there. Jaden McDaniels, say what you want. Shot the ball solidly from 3-point range. Karl Anthony Towns is a 40+% 3-point shooter pretty much for his entire career. Like, one of the best shooting big men of all time, without a doubt. Naz Reid off the bench, plus 3-point shooter. The point is, when you play against them, you have Anthony Edwards attacking, like you have a John Morant attacking. They have guys. I mean, Jaden McDaniels is the one guy that you say, hey, if we're going to leave somebody, that's the guy we need to leave. Jaden McDaniels is the guy that you would say, look, if he makes it, so be it. Well, guess what? Jaden McDaniels, career, 35.4% 3-point shooter. This year, 33.7% overall, but in the playoffs, it's been much better. Last year, shot 39% from 3-point range. So that's the guy that they're choosing to leave over. Jaren Jackson Jr., below league average 3-point shooter. John Morant, below league average 3-point shooter. Marcus Smart. That's the starter right now, right? That's the guy that me and Joe Mullinax have said is probably going to start. Below average 3-point shooter. So you're telling me in today's NBA, this is what we're talking about. Let's say the Grizzlies do draft that center that everyone, wants or whatever. Let's say they get Donovan Clingan, they get a Khalil Ware, they get a Zach Edey or whatever the case may be. And they get the center, or they get a guy in free agency, or they get a guy via trade like Jared Allen. You get the point. They get a center. How many of those centers out there are going to be above average 3-point shooters? Newsflash, there aren't many. So, and there aren't many Karl Anthony Towns growing out there. So the point I'm making is you're probably going to have a below average 3-point shooter at center. Jaren Jackson Jr. is very much a stretch big in my opinion, but he's still below league average by 2 percentage points pretty much. Shot 34% from 3-point range. We just said league average is 36.6% from this past season. John Morant, for his career, has been below league average. Marcus Smart for his career. A lineup with 4 below league average 3-point shooters in Desmond Bane. A bench that includes Luke Kennard, but guess what? Derrick Rose was solid, but is he going to play a lot? Scottie Pippen Jr. was solid, shot 41% from 3-point range in his brief tenure with the Grizzlies. But if you go look at his numbers in the G League over the last 2 years, below league average. Santi Aldama shows the capabilities to be a very good stretch 3-point shooter. But his 3-point shooting percentage this past season, below league average. G.G. Jackson. For as much as G.G. Jackson improved, for as much as we talked about, man, G.G. Jackson shot the ball better this season than he did in any year of his basketball life. I mean, his words, not mine. Still was below league average as a 3-point shooter. Now, the point that I'm making here is you look around the roster, and there aren't a lot of reliable guys from 3-point shooting. There are guys that can catch fire. G.G. Jackson can hit them. Jaren Jackson Jr. has had games where he's hit 4 or 5 3-pointers, gets hot. Marcus Smart has had several games like that. But is that reliable? I don't know. Matter of fact, I do know. No, it's not. You can rely on Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane goes a night and doesn't make a 3-pointer. You're like, wow, what? Luke Kennard goes a game without making a three-pointer. You're like, wow, what? Anyone else, you're not really surprised, as long as they affect the game in other areas. That's why Dalton Knecht makes sense to me. That's why when we talk about free agency needs later on, I'm not gonna be singing the tunes of just adding a big. You need better shooting because guess what? No matter how good the Grizzlies will be in the paint, teams will plan against that in the playoffs. They will be physical. And they will say, okay, yeah, we're going to pack the paint. We're going to make you beat us from the three-point line. And they're going to stay attached to Desmond Bane. They're going to stay attached to Luke Kennard. Someone else is going to have to beat them from the three-point line consistently. Consistently. Who can that be? We don't know if that player is on the roster right now. And that goes back again. That point boils over into the entire show. When I was talking about Zach Kleiman in the first segment, he has not, done a good job of adding shooters. I remember the draft with David Roddy, Jake LaRavia, Kennedy Chandler, Vince Williams. The primary emphasis in that draft, and again, Kyle Anderson didn't resign that year, and you put Santi Aldama in the rotation. A primary goal of that offseason was we need to be a better shooting team. So the idea was there. Just didn't execute it. Grizzlies were not a better shooting team. They were still, matter of fact, they went down from the previous year. I think they were 17th the year they won 56 games. Then went down to 23rd the year they finished with the number 2 seed and won 51 games. Shooting's got to improve here. And it is a major unspoken Grizzlies need because I think, quite frankly, people have just become immune to it. That's why I threw out the stat about 2006, 2007 being the last time that the Grizzlies have had a top 10 three-point offense. And people just have kind of probably talked themselves into the idea that you don't need a top three-point shooting team to cut down the nets or to win the Larry O'Brien. I don't think that's really the case because the way the game is played today, again, you got the Boston Celtics throwing up over 43-point attempts per game. You can shoot 50% from the field and make mostly twos. They just got to shoot 40 from the three, and they're beating you by a considerable margin. So that's the need that I have for the Grizzlies. I think it's a major unspoken need. I think it's one that we're going to hit on Locked On Grizzlies. We're going to talk about some prospects. It's right up there with the bigs. You talk about the bigs, I'm going to talk about the need to address the three-point shooting going forward. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day. The local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with me on today. I think we covered everything that we need to cover, and remember, me and Joe Monax won't be here on Monday. He's getting a well-deserved day off. I'm getting a well-deserved day off as we, that'll be Memorial Day. We'll be back on Tuesday to talk all things Memphis Grizzlies. And I think we got a couple good things to talk about next week. That's all I'm going to say right now. A couple good things. And we might even have some special guests coming to the show soon. So make sure you stay tuned for Locked On Grizzlies throughout the summer days and summer months. A lot of fun content on the way as well. So appreciate you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies today. And remember, Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you on Locked On Grizzlies.